Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Fuqua School of Business Distinguished Speaker Series. We are incredibly fortunate to be joined by Ajay Banga, who is now the executive chairman at MasterCard after having had an incredible 11-year run as CEO. Just to give you a sense of some of those accomplishments that make me describe it as an incredible run. During his time, he tripled revenues, net income went up by a factor of 6, and market capitalization by a factor of 10, all the while outperforming a similar peer in Visa and dramatically outperforming the S&P 500, which itself had a pretty good run during that time. This is not Ajay's first visit with Duke. We're really happy to bring him back. It's been about 3.5 years since he last joined us. The last time he was able to be with us in the building. This time he's with us virtually. But what I can tell all of our listeners is we've had a number of extraordinary guests in our Distinguished Speaker Series over the years. But I would say that we've never had a speaker who's had more impact on the Duke community, on the Fuqua community than Ajay has, as he is the one who first talked about the importance of decency and a decency quotient, something that has really remade the business school around those principles. And so I'm incredibly grateful to Ajay, both for what he's done and for his willingness to rejoin us. And so Ajay, welcome. And of course, this is an interesting transition time for you after having spent 11 years as CEO and now moving into the executive chair role. And so the interesting thing about this is that you've been working hard to work yourself out of a job for a number of those years. Almost from the very beginning, you were worried about succession planning. And so now that you're there, what's the hardest thing about no longer being CEO? I mean, all the conversation is about how do you get to be CEO, but there's actually an important transition to no longer being CEO. So what's hardest for that for you in that transition?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me again, Bill. And I'm glad it's not my first rodeo with you. So I'm enjoying that. And congratulations on your own incredible run at Duke. You're a terrific guy, and I'm so glad I've got to know you over these years. Lucky I came there with Judd when I did and got a chance to meet with you and have that session at Duke. Going out of the job of CEO to exec chair is actually a little bit of a transition, because in actual fact, if I'd just gone completely out of the company, I think I may have had a completely different experience. Right now, I'm still in the office. I'm here. I feel like I'm part of the family, but I've worked very hard to ensure that there's lots of space between the CEO who's taken over and me. What I don't want is the people who used to work for me to feel somehow that they have to be coming to me on the way to meeting him. That would be a really bad outcome of a well-planned succession. So the hardest thing to do actually is to manage that. Because by being here, I've got to work doubly hard to make sure that there's clarity of what I do, what he does, how I don't really want to be in the flow of the day's business, how if I'm here and someone comes to me for advice, I'm able to give the advice without crossing the line between what I don't want to do as the ex-CEO, if you know what I mean. If I just left the building and gone, I wouldn't need to worry about all that. That's the hardest single thing, because it requires you to be alert and careful all the time, because by nature, over 11 years, I've got used to giving guidance and instruction, listening and then giving guidance. Now it's kind of listening and saying, well, why don't you think about it this way? And maybe you should go back and talk to that guy like this, as compared to, let me tell you what you should do. It's an interesting transition.
Yeah. What's the best thing about the transition?
The best thing is watching Michael do his thing. Michael's our new CEO. And over the last year, when he was the president and during the virus and the crisis of COVID, we were transitioning. So he and I were at work every day here in the office. And I watched him grow into his new responsibility. When it's very interesting, Bill, when you're successful as a CEO, whatever be the measures of that success, no board actually wants to make the change because they're content with what's going on. And now you come up to them and you please press the buttons every year and say, let's plan for succession the right way. And I think we've got internal guys, and let's look at a few outside and do it the right way by creating a description of the skills and culture and character matrix of the incoming CEO. And we did all that. We hired an external firm. We went through all that. But despite all that, even when they were voting for him to be anointed the president and the incoming CEO, there was always this feeling inside saying, man, will he be able to do what Ajay did? And that's because when you're successful around, the board never gets to see the number 2 and number 3 and number 4 people with the same openness that they do when you're the boss. And I kept telling them, he will show you that and he will grow into it. And I've seen him do it. And it's the nicest thing in the world because I can feel good about the process. I feel good about the decision. I feel good about him. And I feel good about the people in the company. And what more can you hope for at the end of 11 years?
Fantastic. So this will not surprise you, but I want to come back to this theme of decency that I mentioned in your introduction. So when did the light bulb first go on for you that decency was as important in running a business and in building something as some of these other things that they teach you in business school?
I didn't think of it as decency, to be completely honest. So there's 2 answers to that question. When did it convert into the idea of being decency and then the DQ, the decency quotient idea? That was somewhere in the middle of my tenure at MasterCard. When I was trying to explain to employees time after time in town halls and meetings around the world that I wanted them to bring their heart and their mind to work. I wanted them to not just think numerically about what is to be done, but think as much about how to do it. And do it in a way, therefore, that you didn't justify the end, no matter what the means, but that you cared about the manner in which you got there as much as the getting there itself. The journey was as important as reaching the destination. And I was struggling to, these are complicated topics. You keep repeating them. Different people intake the idea differently. And one day, I had just come out of watching Warren Buffett's annual meeting, and he'd been eating ice cream made from Dairy Queen, DQ. And as you know, I have a slightly weird sense of humor. And so I was explaining this in a town hall to somebody who asked me, how do you describe the idea of decency? Well, what do you mean by that? And this thing of heart and mind. And I said, when I was young, what mattered was your IQ. You had to be really smart, high IQ, you were there. And then when I was going to business school, the idea of EQ had come up, where it said, you got to deal with ambiguity. You have to deal with difficult circumstances and how you conduct yourself, the equanimity with which you handle it, the ability to deal with difficult bosses, difficult colleagues, challenging circumstances. Boy, that's your EQ. That makes you a superior leader. So what I'm telling you now is to bring your DQ to work. And no, I don't mean Dairy Queen, although that's pretty good. You can bring that to work. I'll eat it for you. But what I really meant is bring your decency quotient to work, because then people will follow you to the ends of the earth because you're worth following, because you have your hand on their back and not in their face. You will give them a level playing field and then allow them to run to win. That's all they want. They want transparency, level playing field, hand on the back. That's what they need. And it's stuck. I found people were nodding their heads, and I could read the vibe in the room. And when I left, I got these emails from people all over talking about how that made sense to them. And I said, you know what, I'm going to stick with this. That was about, I think, 5-6 years ago. I'm not quite sure. And that's stuck as the DQ idea. The decency part, I mean, I don't know how it goes back to I don't know, when I was growing up, my dad, my mom, my friends in school, my teachers. I just believe that treating people as equals is not a bad place to be. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you do that and you give them so you give yourself the privilege of listening to people because you've got to learn from them, then you do better. You know, I'm a Sikh, right, Bill? And Sikhs, in our holy book, there's one very important saying, which it kind of gets embedded in you, which is that you sort of reward yourself by serving others. That idea of rewarding yourself by serving others, that's decency in its own way. These are all different ways of describing human connectivity. Put it that way.
So what's interesting is that oftentimes when you talk about decency and being decent, people assume, well, this just means that you're always nice. But I've noticed that the decency doesn't mean you're always nice. It may be that you're honest, you're transparent, and you're willing to push people. And so, as an example, your current CEO asked to rotate into a job that you thought he would have been fantastic in that job.
Yeah.
And you turned him down. You wouldn't let him take that job, even though he would have been fantastic. Can you explain? I mean, that wasn't very nice of you.
So actually, first, the core of the point is that nice and kind is not equal to leadership. I think you should be fair. I think you should be transparent. I think you should be open and honest. I think you should be willing to tell people what you think when they do well as what you think when they haven't done as well. So they can get a guidance from you because, I mean, Bill, leadership is a privilege. You're not born with that privilege. You earn it. And so when you were working for somebody, you looked up to them to guide you and help you when you were challenged or you were facing a crossroad or, they were offering you a new job and you kind of didn't know it's a good idea or not. You took their opinion. So you got to remember when you become that boss, it's time for you to do the same. And I think, therefore, you started with exactly the right point. Nice, kind, not equal to decent. Leadership, not equal to nice, kind, equal to fair, equal to honest, equal to transparent. So Michael, I knew Michael from earlier. He'd worked with me at Citi at a point of time. Then he left and joined Barclays. And when I joined MasterCard back in 2009, I went to Dubai on one of my first trips. And Michael was running Middle East Africa for Barclays. And he came for a client dinner and he came late. And therefore he's seated in one corner. And I hadn't seen him for a few years. And at the end of dinner, I took him out for a drink. And we were chatting and catching up. And I asked him if he'd like to rejoin and come work with me. And he kind of said, really? I said, yeah. He said, well, let me think about it. Called me back in a few days and said, for the right job, why not? So a few months later, Middle East Africa, that region, we made a change in leadership. Michael came in. He did a terrific job. I mean, he was amazing. And 4 years into it, and I've been traveling with him every year a couple of times, and I started talking to him, what do you want to do? And third, fourth year into it, he comes to me and he says, I'd really like to run Asia. It's the future. It's where everybody's going. It's, China, India, ASEAN. It's the big deal. I want to go and do that. So I looked at him and said, you are an idiot. And he said, why am I an idiot? I said, because how does that make you more valuable as a leader for the future of this company? If one day you want to be me, you're just doing another job which is in your zone of comfort. Let me take you out of that and put you in a job that takes you out of your comfort zone, stretches you, pulls you. You might fail a little bit at it. Good for you. You need to learn failure. And let's see how you behave. And give it a try, Michael. And he said, what's that job? I said, I have one for you. And I told him to come and work here in the US to run our products. And then I added in innovation and new launches and a bunch of other things. And And he took it all on and he stretched and stretched and he stumbled and he stretched and did really well. And one of the criteria that tilted the scale in his favor with the board was not just his geographic diversity, a German who worked in Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, and the US, but the ambiguity of the different jobs that he had dealt with. And now he looks back and says, best decision I ever made was when you pushed me to come here.
So how do you find that balance between you pushing people and supporting people?
Well, you got to push them enough for them to feel stretched out of their zone of comfort. But it's an art, it's not a science. You got to know when you are being so pushy that they're only saying yes because you're the boss and they're scared of you. That would be a bad thing. Because then you'll get the wrong result, even though your intentions were right. And so finding that balance, Bill, there's no right form. You have to know when you think that you're pushing too far and take into account what constraints that person may be having. Michael had his own personal constraints as well. We managed those. And when those constraints fell away, he was far more enthusiastic about it. And then I found that worked well. And so it's different each time. And, when you're talking to somebody who's much junior to you, you got to be even more careful because they'll be nervous about saying no to you. So you have to deal with this with humility because you do carry a big stick, even if you don't realize it.
So I think that humility is probably another dimension of decency. Now you've tried to simplify another term that's been very important and relevant in the world today, which is, and I quote, you said, inclusion is a fancy word for human decency. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think of the world's problems. Let me step back a second. The United Nations has 17 SDGs. My problem with 17 is that I can't remember 17 things. My attention span kind of drops off at number 3 or 4. And so I try and put things in a simpler way. And one day I sat down and said, I need to translate these 17 into what I can get my arms around. And I tried to put them on 3 sides of a triangle. So one side of the triangle is the trade-off between one and many. That's the inclusion. Whether it's financial inclusion, ethnic inclusion, gender inclusion, sexual orientation, growing up on the wrong sides of the tracks, emerging markets, developed world, whatever be these stupid terms that we use to fragment our society, that is on one side of the triangle. And the other side of the triangle is man versus nature. And I call it man versus nature because men are more destructive than women are of their environment. It's just, you can step back and look at it dispassionately, you will find that to be true. But even if you were to be more generous and call it humanity versus nature, that whole climate, ecological, water, air we breathe, what we're leaving behind for our children, that's the second side of the triangle. The triangle stays up because the bottom, unfortunately, is very strong. And that's the trade-off between long-term and short-term. We are applying Band-Aid short-term solutions to very long-term problems of one versus many and humanity versus nature. Whether you're a politician or a CEO, a teacher or a student, a parent or a child, short-term solutions are what we tend to apply. And in this current world of technology, everything is binary. You're either a friend or not. You're either included or canceled. You're either liked or not. That world, which is very powerful, is doing a lot for society. That world is also driving binary behavior. And so one of my concerns in life was this inclusion-exclusion issue. How do you get people to identify with it? And how can you tolerate exclusion? I tell people jokingly, all you need is to be a father of girls, and you will never tolerate gender exclusion. It changes the way you think forever. Now, if that be so, then why not embrace the idea of saying that decency is equality, and equality is equality of all types. And you earn, all people want, Bill, I really believe this, is a level playing field. There's no woman who works for me who wants to be told that she got a job because she looked different from you. And there's no way that I would stay in this role if I was told I got my job because I look different from Bill. That would just destroy my own self-confidence and my pride in myself, and I would leave. So I don't want a hand up. I'm not looking for a leg up. I'm just looking for a level playing field and let me win. And that level playing field is equal to equality. And equality and decency and humility, these words are all intertwined in the milk of human kindness, man. It's just behave is what it's about. Just behave. It's not that difficult. And by the way, don't get me wrong, I make mistakes. I say things I shouldn't have said. I can get angry with people. I make all the mistakes you make. I'm not holier than thou in this. But I'm willing to acknowledge them and try and fight them. And I do them sometimes well. Sometimes I make the same mistake a second time. And then it hurts. And so this is not easy, but it's really important.
So what makes you optimistic that we can reverse this pattern of exclusion? And so one of the things that we've talked about over the years is immigration, and how in this country, all of a sudden we shifted from being welcoming to unwelcoming. How do we move in the right direction in bringing people together with common purpose?
I mean, but I think the fragmentation, separation, I think they've been part of society forever, just forever, right? And what is it that what Martin Luther King said, right? The arc of the universe is long, but it does bend towards justice. I'm paraphrasing, but basically, it may take time, but it does bend towards justice. And I think society's always had its weird divisions. Religious divisions, ethnic divisions, these have been with us since time immemorial, right? So I think we ascribe too much to this has happened in the recent past or the last decade or the last 4 years or the prior 6 years. I think what's really happening is intolerance is going up, not the fragmentation. And intolerance, this lack of willingness to respect differences in points of view is going up. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was reading a book during the pandemic written by somebody I admire. I've been on a panel with him once, and rock star, a guy called Amartya Sen, who wrote, he's a famous Indian economist, jurist, thinker, kind of philosopher in many ways. And he wrote this book called The Idea of Justice. And actually it responds to Rawls' theory that there is one ideal way of justice. And he's basically saying, no, there isn't an ideal. Now, by the way, it's a tough book to read. It took me a lot of reading. I had to get back at it a few times. But I finally understood it because I had to first go and understand Rawls, who I had never read in my education, right? So I went back and read a little bit of that. That was hard enough. And then I read this. And what I understood was very interesting. In the middle of the book, he describes 3 kids with a flute. And one kid says, hey, the flute should be mine because I don't have any other toys. And one kid says, hey, the flute should be mine because I'm the one who can actually play it. And one kid says, hey, the flute should be mine because, I'm the one who found it. So I should keep it. Now, you could call one of those guys an egalitarian, one of those guys a libertarian, and one of those guys a utilitarian. On any day of the week, I could find a way to convince you that one of them was right, or convince myself that one of them was right. But actually, I'm not sure one of them is right all the time. The circumstances will dictate how I feel about it. And that made me understand. And later in the book, he talks about democracy and how democracy is not just elections, it's democracy by discussion. And I think we are losing a little bit of that in our society, this willingness to have a different point of view. You and I don't have to agree on everything, but we can still be great friends because we have the willingness to stretch each other's mind by disagreeing, but with respect. There's nothing wrong with respectful disagreement. There's nothing wrong with challenging me. There's nothing wrong with pushing and pulling me. I actually think I grow by that. And so back to your question of society, I'm not sure we have a problem with division. I think we have a problem with intolerance. And so I don't think we should wait for our leaders to change. I think you should look at yourself, every one of us, and say, are we being as tolerant of dissent? Or is it my way or the highway? How often do you hear people telling you, you don't understand? You need to really get this right. Well, no, I don't. I don't need to get it right just because you tell me it's right. I need to get it right because I need to understand what's right. I think that willingness to go through the pain of discussion, it's painful. It's easier to just surround yourself with people who look like you, walk like you, talk like you, and agree with you on everything. But guess what? That's not diversity. And that's going to kill innovation. Because innovation comes when you don't have blind spots. And blind spots come when people challenge you. They get killed when people challenge you. So I don't know, it's a long way of explaining, but it's kind of live in my head. This book is live in my head. This idea of justice is live in my head. It's just...
Okay, so to try to transition from that to something where there's conflict or differing points of view, we've seen a lot about this transition from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And so this means that oftentimes you're having to balance these different priorities, these competing views. And you were doing an interview where you were asked about how do you balance your employees versus the company interests? And your answer was, the first thing you have to do is look after your people. And so there was a clear priority there. Explain how that works for you in terms of this overall balancing act.
So, Bill, I think attaching words like stakeholder and conscious capitalism in front of capitalism, I actually vehemently disagree with that, because that implies that somehow capitalism is bad and you need to find a good word to preface this bad thing. So I've got a fundamental disagreement with that, right? As a person, I believe that capitalism has done pretty well to lift people out of poverty. And by the way, as my friend Dov Seidman was saying to me earlier today, in a different conversation, he said, our world has become a world where there is not a problem with how much we have. We had 50 years ago famines and not enough food and not enough this, that, and the other. He said, how much we have plenty of. What you have a problem with is how. How do we conduct ourselves? How do we deal with things? How do we behave? That's his way of describing the decency quotient. So it is in a different context we were discussing it. But the idea of capitalism needing an adjective causes me some angst. Because I do agree it needs guide rails. I think every system, unfettered, allowed to be run by vested interests who benefit disproportionately at the cost of others, they will then bias it towards them. That's a bad idea. You need guide rails, whether those are government and regulatory guide rails, societal guide rails, or a combination of both. You need them. Does capitalism need that? 100%. Has capitalism done well? 100%. Could it do better? 100%. I agree with all three of those statements, right? And so that's where I'm coming from. Now, on employees versus stakeholders versus consumers versus customers and all that stuff, I think this versus word is a bad word, because that somehow makes it feel like you got to choose one over the other. And I don't believe in that either, because which company exists to not serve a consumer well? And which company exists to not provide a good return to its shareholders who've given you money? And by the way, how can you do either of those by not having really cool employees who are working their butts off to make you as the CEO look good? How could you do it? And therefore, if you don't start with the foundational plank of your employees, how are you going to get the other ones done? And that's how simple a trade-off it is. There's no trade-off. It is the only way to do it. You start with your employees, you look after them, and you give them the power and the authority to do things. Give them a clear vision. Repeat that vision in simple language ad nauseum. Stand by your words, celebrate success, give them the place, give them measures, and then get out of the way a little bit. Kind of be with them. It's not, management is not that hard. It's a set of simple rules. The hard part is yourself. Because if you're a control freak, then it gets a little harder. And so that's kind of my way of answering this, is that I don't see any other way. During the pandemic, Bill, the first thing I announced with Michael was we would lay off no employees because of the pandemic last year. Our revenues did suffer. We lost profits. Some of those numbers you talked about actually got damaged in my last year. But you know what? We have great employees and they're still here. And once they were able to get out of the fear of looking after their job and focus instead on their health, their families, and their customers, they were just fine. And that's true of everything we do with them. If you've got a minute, I'll tell you 2 other things we do. Small things, but they're actually very big. In our company, if you contribute 6% to your 401k from your salary, I'll give you 10 into your 401k. You put in 6, I'll give you 10. There are very few companies that do that. It costs me hundreds of millions of dollars. The logic is, if you save 16% a month and you enter at 55k and you retire at 55, at 250 plus, which you will get to our company, if you do the math of compounding on that with a small return per annum, you actually end up with a decent pension equivalent as an annuity when you retire. Otherwise, you can't retire on a 401k in this country. We have a retirement crisis looming in our country. We've got that as another problem. Similarly, in our company, you get 16 weeks of paid, fully paid, no pro rata bonus nonsense, leave, whether you're a mother or a father of a child, biologically born or adopted, gay or straight, I don't care. You get 16 weeks paid leave, either gender. And in the beginning, managers fought me because guess what? They had to carry you for 4 months and not fill the job. And I told them, by the way, what if it was your daughter or your son? How would you feel about me right now? Changes. Everything changes. So, that's decency. And my company believes in this. You can come to any employee in my company and they will tell you, DQ, they will tell you 16 weeks paid leave. They will talk about the 6 and 10 match. 97% of my employees take and save the 6% because they get 10%.
So I want to follow up on this in terms of, has anything really changed in terms of the role of a business? When you were looking for your replacement, you said that you needed someone who had a strong sense of social mission, because this is a role that you believe corporations play now in society, and that will continue in the future. So is that something that has changed during your time as CEO, where the social mission of the company has become more important, or has that always been there?
No. I mean, what happened was that part of it is always there. To give you an example, when the IPO of this company happened, which was 2 years before I joined, my predecessor constructed the IPO in what I think was brilliant in its simplicity, where the banks that used to own our company earlier put aside 12% of their shareholding to create a foundation headquartered in Canada, run independently of this company, but has the name and the logo, MasterCard Foundation, 12% of the stock. That 12% at the time of the IPO was worth $550 million. Today, so when I retired as CEO to become exec chair, actually our company had multiplied 17 and a half times, not 10 times in that years. So it was 350 billion was the market cap that day, 31st of December. 350 billion That foundation is now worth, having sold some shares along the way, $38 billion. It's one of the biggest foundations in the world, and it's devoted to the cause of creating jobs in Africa. That's what it's spending its money on. So I would argue that social mission existed at the time of the IPO. What happened was, along the way, when I came here, we were still defining competition as our electronic payment competitors. The other firms like Visa, American Express, Discover, China Union Pay, the local schemes in every country, those were the ones we defined as our competition. But electronic payments in the retail payments business, forget about B2B, that's another game altogether. Just in consumer to business was 85% cash then, and it's still 80%. So I kind of said, why are we focusing on the 15? Let's focus on the 85, much bigger marketplace. And we started focusing on cash. And we started studying the cost of cash and how cash got created. And we discovered that one of the biggest ways cash got created was the payments of governments to their own citizenry. Veterans Affairs, Social Security, health benefits, pension benefits, subsidies, farmer purchase prices, minimum supports, FEMA payments, you name it. They were all coming out of there. 30% of the cash in the economy was created by the government paying its own citizenry. Single largest chunk. So, and then we discovered that 2 billion people in the world didn't have an identity. And they were therefore effectively excluded from what you and I took for granted. You don't have an identity, you don't even get counted, Bill. You don't exist. Right? You may as well be in prison. Nobody cares. And so the task here is you can't just say, hey, I have a mobile phone. I can use mobile phones to include people. Because guess what? You can give them a phone to make money go from them to their mother, but you can't really get them financial inclusion because nobody will give them credit, nobody will give them insurance, nobody will give them an identity. And by the way, if you don't have an identity, bankers don't open bank accounts for you. So that led to the realization that we had to could we use our technology in some way to help create identities? And it started out actually with Michael Miebach in South Africa, with the South African social security system that wanted to give its citizenry a biometric identity. They gave the identity, we put it on a chip on a card. One side was the money loaded, one side was their identity. And all of a sudden, this poor woman in Johannesburg, in Soweto, who used to get money in cash from an agent, which meant the agent had sticky fingers and he would keep part of the money as his commission for giving you your money. All that changed. And she would now get the money electronically on a card, go into an ATM and take out her cash, or go and use the card to buy rice and potatoes and wheat and whatever else she wanted to buy. Everything changed. I met this woman like her. It's a big article in the FT. There was a full page article, me talking to her. And I talked to her and she told me, you gave me back my dignity. And I realized I was on to something. And I came back and started talking to people in the company saying, hey, what Michael is doing with this, I'm going to do this around the world. 3 months later, I was on the stage with the World Bank conference with the CEO of the World Bank at that time, Jim Kim, with Christine Lagarde of the IMF at that time, and with Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, who was the United Nations envoy for sustainable growth, for inclusion. And I made a commitment that I would reach 500 million people with my partners by 2020. This was in 2014. And I had no idea how I'd get there. But we got there. And now we've raised that commitment to 1 billion, including 50 million micro SMEs and 25 million women. And Michael's going to get it done. And my point with all this is, that's when it became part of our fabric, because we realized it was part of our business model. If you were going to compete with cash, we needed to get these people into the financial mainstream. And the only way to do that was to help them to get financially included. And so we won't get paid back for this work. I told people, for the investor community, my successor will benefit from this. So I told Michael, your turn, bud. You're going to deliver against that and find the next thing that your successor will benefit from. That's the idea.
So you've had incredible passion around this issue of inclusive finance, and it, as you said, it makes sense as a part of your long-term business model. How do you make decisions about things where the connection may be less obvious or less direct? The example being that MasterCard has made significant commitments in the climate change space.
Yeah. Well, again, I connected it back to the business model. So first, remember the one versus many, humanity versus nature thing? So the one versus many is our effort with the billion people and the 50 million micro SMEs and that. We've made commitments around small businesses, $250 million for them. We've made commitments around the Black community in America. We said we'll put $500 million to work to help them, all kinds of things there. That's on that side. The other side was humanity versus nature. And I kept scratching my head about how can I help make a difference at scale. So we made a commitment to be net zero by, at the right time. We made a commitment to 1.5 degrees. We've made a commitment to scope 1, scope 2. We've done that. But we are not a company with a large carbon footprint. So that's interesting, but it won't change my daughter's life. And so finally, we stumbled on the idea of using our network capacity. So our network is what makes us reach 1 billion people. We're not doing it ourselves. It's with banks and telcos and governments and all that. They're the ones who actually have the consumer. I'm not a consumer company. So I said, can I do that for climate change? And we got up with the idea of what we're calling the Priceless Planet Coalition. So we got to meet a company called Doconomy in the Nordics that actually we've now invested in as a company that has an index that allows you as a consumer to get an idea of your carbon footprint when you spend something. It's not completely accurate. It's got challenges, but it's still pretty cool because now, carbon tax, carbon markets, carbon credits, consumers don't understand that stuff. It's kind of ephemeral. But if I could make you understand how much carbon footprint you have, Bill, and your family has, maybe I could incent you to behave differently by saying, for example, don't take a paper statement, take it electronically, and I'll plant a tree for you, because trees help capture carbon. Don't take the taxi, take an underground train, I'll plant a tree for you every time you tap with your MasterCard, and so on, right? And so that would require my banks and my merchants to become partners with me. So we committed we'd get to 100 million trees to be planted in the next few years with partners. We've now got 40 partners signed up, banks, merchants. We've got American Airlines signed up. We've got banks signed up. We've got all kinds of folks in this community. And I'm looking for more. So if you got ideas, give them to me. I'll take them. And so the idea is to get to 100 million trees and make a difference with that. And so we've signed up a scientific advisory board. We've created partnerships with people who know how to handle the planting of trees and nurturing them in the right way. So you plant the right trees and you nurture them the right way. And so Conservation International is one of our partners to do that, and so on.
Okay, that's an extraordinary way you've pulled things together there. So I'm going to shift gears a bit into some of the technology issues that you've had to confront. So MasterCard has been in the news recently for embracing cryptocurrency. And I just want to ask you to contrast the recent decision to support cryptocurrency with your decision not that long ago to pull out of Libra, which was the Facebook attempt at a cryptocurrency. Yeah. So what's happened?
So step back a second. And the context of this whole thing is that we've been investing in distributed ledger technology for a while. In fact, we are one of the larger patent holders in blockchains, which is one use of distributed ledgers. And cryptocurrency is one use of the blockchain. And Bitcoin, Ethereum are all examples of that. So it's kind of like an inverted pyramid, huh? Distributed ledger, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and then different examples. The underlying technology of the blockchain and distributed ledger, we are big fans of, because we believe that somewhere along the line, this will lead to some interesting ideas in fighting counterfeit goods, fighting, proof of origin, proof of authenticity, cross-border trade, maybe. I think there could be a lot of uses there. My problem as a company, our problem as a company with cryptocurrency per se, was that the original forms of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin had 2 or 3 fundamental problems which didn't allow them to be, in my mind, viewed as currency. First, they were volatile as heck. They still are. I mean, in the last 2 months, the currency has gained doubled in price. And by the way, it's done that a few times over the last few years. It does this, right? So to exaggerate a little bit, if you bought a Coke from a merchant for $2 that you paid in Bitcoin right now, and then tomorrow that was worth 20 cents, and then day after it was worth $20, that's a pretty difficult business proposition. For you as a consumer, for that merchant as a businessman, or for the distributor of Coke, or for Coke itself. So volatility, of that type is not okay in a currency. As an asset class, it's a different issue. If you're a sophisticated investor, you want to buy pork bellies and make money, go ahead. You want to buy Bitcoin and make or lose money, go ahead. But don't tell me it's a currency. It's not, because a currency implies stability as a medium of exchange. Similarly, you need to have compliance with transparency of rules around know your customer and anti-money laundering. The way Bitcoin was designed, it was designed for its anonymity, which is interesting. There's a use for that. I'm not disputing that, but not for currency in the public tender. And so, there's a whole lot of things there that didn't work. And that's why I publicly said Bitcoin's not a currency, it's an asset. Then came Libra. And Libra was different. They were trying to solve for the stability point by connecting it as a stable coin to a basket of fiat currencies. So they took away some of the volatility issues, but they still had the issues around know your customer, anti-money laundering, transparency of who was holding the wallet, as well as some degree of discomfort in explaining how your data might be used. So that led to us saying, why don't you go sort that out? When you do, we'll come back in. So we're in active conversations with a number of players of that type who I think are making a lot of progress in those spaces of stability, compliance with local laws, as well as compliance with data and how that data is used. Go forward a little further. And what Michael was talking about is effectively stable coins, interesting if they also do these other things, but central bank digital currencies, of which China is already attempting one, but the Nordic Sweden is attempting to look at it, Canada is looking at it, Singapore is looking at it, different countries, even the US Federal Reserve is beginning to think about it in some ways. I think central bank digital currencies, in which, by the way, we have a number of patents as well, probably the single largest payments player with those patents. We've created a sandbox for regulators, commercial banks to investigate how to play together in that space. That, to me, holds the most promise because, first of all, it won't be volatile, or it won't be more volatile than a central bank currency. Central bank currencies can be volatile. Look at the Turkish lira in its difficult days, or the Brazilian real, or the Argentinian peso. They've had tough times, right? So they can be volatile, but you're already in that currency. So to me, they're not more volatile than the fiat currency. Second, by virtue of being central bank currencies, they will comply with know your customer and anti-money laundering. And third, they will comply with data laws of that country because there's no central bank that's going to go against its own country's data laws. And so to me, that's another use. So what Michael was trying to say is that we think central bank digital currencies may actually be a great outcome of this. But in the meanwhile, these other stable coins, including Facebook's, may actually get to the point where they solve for a lot of these issues, in which case we can be helpful to connect them to consumers, to merchants, and to banks.
So this is just one example of how your life is complicated with these these changes in technology and what's possible. And the last time we spoke, we talked a lot about Apple Pay, and was Apple a customer or a competitor? And of course, since then, they've introduced their own card, which I believe runs on your network.
It's a MasterCard, yes.
So you're clearly still cooperating with them in a positive way, but you also are aware that I guess at any time these big tech players who have an insatiable appetite for growth could become switch from friend to foe. And there is, to paraphrase a quote, the person who has the biggest shoes is going to use them to extract whatever they can from you. And so just tell me where you think that stands in terms of your ability to negotiate this future with these big tech players.
Yeah, I think the whole of technology is really interesting, big and small. I mean, even new innovative players, there's always somebody who's going to be out there trying to figure out a way to do what we do better than we do. And my first approach to that is that's kind of what they should be trying to do. And what we should be trying to do is to figure out a way to not give them that space, which means do your job better and keep reinventing yourself. So, for example, back to that earlier topic of cryptocurrency, we have said out there publicly, we are not a card company, even though we have card in my name. I mean, Apple doesn't sell apples, right? to talk about Apple. And Amazon is actually a river in Brazil. But, what's in a name, right? So we are actually not, I don't know how to give you a card. If you ask me for it, I'd have to send you to a bank. But what I've said very clearly is our job is to provide choice and make the payment experience safe, simple, and smart and frictionless for merchants, banks, and consumers. So we've said we're a multi-rail company. We will let you pay directly from your bank account by instant payments. We own VocaLink, which is of course the largest instant payment provider in the UK, but we're also implementing it in the Nordics and Saudi and in the Philippines and Peru and in the US. The clearinghouse uses our technology for that. So what our vision is, you want to pay by card, go ahead. You want to pay by account to account, go ahead. You want to pay by blockchain and cryptocurrency, go ahead. Our job is to give you one pipe to connect into all those options. Your job is to choose whatever suits you better. That logic applies with technology. Big players, small players, if you engage with them with this approach that says, I've got something to offer you. What do I have to offer you? Technology that works across any rail of this type, one pipe to connect into for you. That connects you to 100 million merchants in the world, and that connects you across 200 countries where we have made sure that we therefore follow the legal rules and regulations of every country on payments, because that's the only way we could be there. Then you, Mr. FinTech or Mr. Apple or Mr. Amazon or Mr. Google or a smaller player, you get the chance to do what you do best, which is figure out how to give the consumer the world's best experience. And you can ride our rails and we'll make the rest of this possible. Because I'm not in the business of competing with you for your consumer. I'm not a B2C company. I'm a B2B company, and with a B2B2C mentality, right? So I get consumer insights into the interaction of B2B. But I'm not in the business of competing with Apple or Amazon or Google. I'm not. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I think Apple partners well with us. I actually think they're amazing. And it's not just their card, but even Apple Pay runs on the rails of all of us card players too. PayPal, which everybody thought would be a competitor, Dan Schulman and PayPal. PayPal is one of our best partners. Dan's one of my best friends. Google has now just announced, along with Citibank, that they will use us for entering into the opportunity to offer banking services to their customers. And, so I don't know, Rakuten in Japan or Grab in Asia or Paytm in India, they're all partners. And I understand that, therefore, when you partner with them, there's one more person at the table. And therefore, the economics will be shared differently. Banks, merchants, us, and this digital player will need to share the economics. And that's okay. I can't reach consumers without them. It's as simple as that.
So in terms of the digital revolution, there clearly are enormous benefits to society. And it's incredibly helpful in terms of reaching this goal of inclusive finance. But you're also concerned about it intensifying the digital divide. So how do we make sure that we don't leave people behind with the revolution?
Well, so one thing first I'm very clear on is I think the internet and digital is amazing stuff. Just don't get me wrong at all. I think that technology of this type is the ultimate democratizer of access. It's just amazing. So when I was younger, you had to get hold, if you want to find out where the Galapagos was, living in India, you had to get an Encyclopedia Britannica to understand not just where it was, but what was there. And an Encyclopedia Britannica was expensive, and my parents couldn't afford it. And so you got second-hand or third-hand booklets. And that's what you got. And you were lucky if you got that. Today, you can Google it, and you'll get every single piece of information that's in the public realm about the marvels of the Galapagos. The same with medicine for your grandmother. The same with anything, information you want on any topic. I think it's amazing. If you're a small business in the pandemic, the only reason they survived was because of digital technology, because they were able to go online and enable you to buy things online. And big businesses have ways of reaching very far distributed places through building distribution, which they can afford. The internet and digital has removed the arbitrage benefit of that. That's why small businesses are competing with big ones all day long. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's start from that. Now, the issue is, on the other side, yes, there's the digital divide. We just saw it in the pandemic, where forget about rural America, urban America, in Harlem, kids had challenges getting school education because they didn't have broadband access, or they only had one phone in the house, or I get it. So that's not a good place to be. But I think, therefore, what we need to do with this internet and digital is recognize the benefit of it and then work the hardest we can to address those three sides of the triangle: inclusion on all fronts, climate change and what it could do, and do it with a long-term view. And so whether it is, in the case of the digital divide, whether it is investing in building out digital infrastructure in countries, which is why I'm a big supporter of the infrastructure efforts that need to happen in this country. Our physical and digital infrastructure don't look like a first world country. And that needs to change, right? And not just because you and I will enjoy it, but because those who do not have the privilege that you and I have will be even further left behind if we don't make the effort. That's the point. And so I think infrastructure is very important. Education is very important. You're going to educate folks on what they can do with this technology and how well they can use it. And one of the best ways to do that is to make government services available on this technology. Because every citizen will then interact with government services on it and say, oh, this is cool. And then comes the issue of, can you give away enough computers and phones at cheaper enough prices to enable those who cannot afford the expensive ones to still get access to this technology? That, to me, can be solved by philanthropy, subsidies, that kind of stuff. But the other two, those are hard nuts to crack, and we need to get going, Bill. And so one part of it is the digital divide. Another part of it is how your data will be used. Because one thing I will not subscribe to is that somehow now Big Brother should know whether I bought a pink tie or yellow shoes at Bloomingdale's when I used my card or my Apple Pay, or I paid with my forehead, or whatever the heck is tomorrow's way of doing it, right? I don't want that to happen. I don't want anyone to, it's my information, it's my privacy. So I think having data principles, which is kind of where the European Union went with GDPR, which we all decry, we shouldn't. The principles behind GDPR are actually excellent. There are 18 states in the United States all trying to enact their own version of that. That's a bad idea. You need one federal rule. You don't need 18 rules where you need to stop your car at every state border and sign a new document before you can go inside. That would be nonsense. But the idea of GDPR is very simple. And we as a company have published our principles. We're trying to collect a coalition of the willing, like the Priceless Planet Coalition, to make this happen. We've got a few companies signed up. What are the principles? You as a consumer, it's your data and you deserve to benefit from it. Rule 1. Rule 2, you need to know what's being collected about you in simple English, not at the end of an 18-page legal disclosure that you scroll down to and you click I agree without reading, or even worse, there's an I agree on top. You don't even have to scroll. Right? So you need to know what's being collected about you. Third, you need to be able to say, I don't want that to happen. Stop, desist, and delete what you collected about me. And you need to be able to do it in simple English, not in some legal document. 4, I as a company, if I'm doing business with you, I should collect the minimum I need to do my job with you. So for example, in my company's case, when you shop on your card, whatever form factor, Apple Pay, PayPal, physical card, contactless, online, whatever, I do not know your name. I don't get that. Your bank gets it and the merchant gets it. They deserve to. I don't. I don't know what you bought. Only the merchant knows. Even the bank doesn't know. All I know is a 16-digit code, which is your card number or a token protected code that comes from PayPal or Apple Pay, which we provide them the services of, tokenization, which is garbling the numbers so they can't be used again. That's kind of spreading as a way of safety. And I know a dollar value, a merchant code, and a time. That's all I know. So I should collect the minimum I need to do your job. And finally, what I do collect, I should keep safe. Hence the tokenization. I'm trying to do it now across our entire system, both at motion and at rest data to be tokenized. So even if a thief gets into a weak point at a merchant or somewhere, they can't reuse that data. So these are not difficult. Your data, you should benefit from it. You deserve to know what's being collected. You have a right to have to stop and delete. And by the way, in English or whatever language you prefer, whatever I collect the minimum and keep it safe. It's not that tough, but it will change the business model of the way the internet is developing. And I believe it will change it for the better because it'll give the consumer back their privacy and yet allow them to engage when they want to. You see what I mean? So if you talk to Tim Berners-Lee, who many credit with being one of the original thinkers of the internet, who I'm friendly with a little bit and I know him a little bit, he will describe this as trying to create privacy pockets for you on the internet, where Bill allows me as a friend to access certain things about Bill, but not your taxes or your healthcare data or your financials or your grades in school. Your wife is allowed to access more because you chose to give her that access. Your tax accountant, differently. Your government, something else. That's the idea of this.
So I have so many more questions, and sadly, we've run out of time. But I am just so grateful that you've joined us and given these insights to our community. I have to say that we talk in our community, as I said, we've really adopted this notion of IQ, EQ, and DQ. And Ajay, you are off the charts in the most positive sense of being off the charts on all three of those dimensions. You're just an incredible business leader, and we have so much to learn from you. Thank you so much for being with the Duke community.
No, thank you. It's a privilege, and you're giving me way too much credit. But one thing is that don't forget that DQ also has an excellent ice cream. All the best, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you.